You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land we celebrate music. In this land we celebrate games. In this land we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VGMbassy. Welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VGMbassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I may share a part of my culture on a solo show. Today's episode is Episode 9, Game & Watch, with The Messenger, and I have a repeat VG Ambassador with me today, Mr. Alex, The Messenger, and we're talking about the Game & Watch series of Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games today. Alex, thank you for joining us, and welcome back to the show.
Yeah, I can't believe I am back so soon. And also that we're doing an episode on Game & Watch.
I know, only 5 episodes between them, but that's cool. I mean, I've already had Emily on twice, so, I mean, like I said, we're going to have a rotating cast of VG Ambassadors that come on the show, so you might see a lot of repeat faces over and over again with some more exotic VG Ambassadors coming in less often, so... But I really enjoyed talking about hockey with you the last time on episode 4, so I was thrilled to have you back. This is a Patreon-related show, and this is also the first post-launch show that I'm recording, and I really wanted to thank everyone for the amazing support that you've been giving the VGMbassy since the show launched. It's been amazing. I've gotten so much excellent feedback, so many suggestions here and there of how I can improve things, lots of conversation on the Discord and the Facebook group, emails telling me that they love the show. So it's been really, really cool to hear all of your guys' feedback. I'm so glad that you guys are enjoying it. This is obviously a labor of love for me, and it's really awesome that I get to know that you guys are really enjoying what I'm doing. So that being said, I did open up my Patreon about a month or so ago. You can find it at patreon.com/thevgembassy, or you can go right to thevgembassy.com, and there's a link to the Patreon up on top of the page, and you can click on it there and check out the tiers. And Alex is one of those patrons, so he is at the VG Ambassador tier, one of the top tiers of the Patreon, and that reward for that tier is to design your own VGMbassy show, and that's what we're doing today. He's here. He's loved the Game & Watch series forever. I remember, Alex, I must have been 2.5 years ago, like when VGM Jukebox was first starting, when you were just known as The Messenger, and once in a while you would drop by and drop off a Game & Watch song for Emily and Josh to play without any sort of testimonial at all, and you were just the mysterious Game & Watch guy. That's how I kind of knew you as. So how did you discover the Game & Watch series, and what drew you to it so much?
Well, it all started a long, long time ago.
In a galaxy far away.
Well, things weren't too far away. I mean, you're just in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Way back in the late 90s, I don't really know if it was like 97 or 98, but I just had a Game Boy, and some of the first games that I had, I had, it was Donkey Kong Land 2, it was some Tiny Toons adventure game, and then I also had the very first Game & Watch gallery. So that's how all the Game & Watch love started.
So you actually own the games back when they were new? Because I was wondering that, whether you had just kind of discovered the soundtrack and fell in love with them and then played the games, or whether it was kind of an organic experience where you had the games as a kid. So that's really cool. So you've got a lot of experience with a lot of these titles then. I only discovered them through you, honestly. I don't even know if I knew that they existed. I mean, I used to go to an orthodontist. I had braces in like 4th, 5th grade. And so at the dentist's office, he would have a ton of the actual Game & Watch units, and you could actually, pick them off a table, pick out whichever one you want to play, and then play on these Game & Watch devices, while you were getting your braces adjusted or, whatever they had to do that time. And with my braces, I would have to go like every 2 weeks to get adjustments done. So I played a lot of those actual Game & Watch devices. And so when I eventually discovered the galleries through your sharing them on VGM Jukebox, I was like, oh, this is really cool. I can go check out a lot of those Game & Watch things that I played at my orthodontist's office, but on a Game Boy, and it was really cool. So, did you own all of the Game & Watch galleries when you were a kid, or did you just have the first one?
I had the first and the fourth one. 2 and 3, I just played later in life, and really enjoyed them as well.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun to play. They're very simple games. A little history on the Game & Watch series. So Nintendo released 60 handheld LCD games between 1980 and 1991. It's 60 games in 11 years. That's a lot of titles. These games were all part of the Game & Watch series, and they were so named because it was both a game and a timepiece. So when you weren't playing the game, you could flip open these Game & Watch devices and look at the screen, and it would show the time on there, so you could kind of use it as a watch. The game hardware was designed by the brilliant Gunpei Yokoi, who was more well known for his innovations on the Game Boy, the Virtual Boy, and Bandai's WonderSwan gaming systems. The products were a huge success in both Japan and North America, and Nintendo produced them all the way up to the release of the Game Boy unit in 1990. I think they only released 2 of the 60 Game & Watch units after the Game Boy was released. So they just took all of their portable game R&D and just threw it all at the Game Boy once the Game Boy came out. The Game & Watch games featured in these gallery titles are mostly originals, but Nintendo did make ports of games like the Mario games, the Zelda games, and the Donkey Kong series once those games became more popular on the home consoles. So I think in the gallery you see a couple of Donkey Kong titles, but you're not going to see any of the like the Super Mario game or the Zelda game. Those were also LCD handhelds that were kind of ported from the original Nintendo titles, and they were good games in their own right for the Game & Watch games, but as ports of the console titles, they were very rudimentary and kind of, in my opinion, difficult to play. I used to try them out when I was at my orthodontist's office, and always had a difficult time. I really enjoyed the original titles more than the ports. So, I mean, have you ever played any of the actual Game & Watch games themselves, Alex?
Actually, no, I haven't.
Oh, really? So, the cool thing about the gallery titles is that you can play either modern versions or classic versions of the games that are included. So the modern versions will have characters like Mario and updated graphics and animation and sometimes different gameplay. And then the classic versions are more or less direct simulations of the original Game & Watch game. So they would look like, physical LCD games with very, very choppy, blocky graphics and little beeps and boops that sound just like the original LCD games did. But we're not going to focus too much on that because the modern versions of the games is where all the music plays. You don't get any soundtracks for the classic versions. So we're going to be talking mostly about the modern versions today. And we'll go into a little bit about the classic versions if the classic versions are, extremely different from what the modern versions are. Anything else you want to talk about, Alex, before we get into our first track?
No, I think that's pretty much it right there.
Okay, so we're going to start the music off with Game Boy Gallery, which was released for the Super Game Boy in 1995. This was a title that was only available in Europe, and as a matter of fact, Alex and I didn't even know this title existed until we started doing research for this show. So this is a brand new discovery for both of us. So Alex, what's your first pick for the show?
I picked Vermin.
Vermin. All right, so let's give Vermin a listen, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back. That was Vermin from the game Game Boy Gallery, released on the Super Game Boy in Europe in 1995. This title did not see release in Japan or North America, believe it or not. It's a Europe-only title. The composer is unknown. There's no credits in the game. Nobody knows who worked on it, unfortunately. But good soundtrack. It's very, very simple, very, very bouncy. Alex and I were talking while we were listening to it. I felt like it kind of fit like a simple Alberto Gonzalez kind of bounce. And I mentioned Tiny Toon Adventures. Dun 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 dun. We're all a little loony, and that's now all I can hear whenever I listen to the song. What'd you think, Alex?
I mean, I just thought it was, just a cool little song. I mean, I don't know. It didn't really, I wasn't, a super huge fan of it, but kind of just compared to, everything else on the soundtrack, I don't know, it might be the best track.
Yeah, Game Boy Gallery, I think we're throwing in here more for the sake of completion, more than because it's totally awesome. I think the Game & Watch series games really upped the ante as far as gameplay and music went. Game Boy Gallery was just a very, very simple, almost a budget title. I'm not sure how much money it released for sale when it came out in Europe, but I would not expect this to be a full-priced game. And if it was a full-priced game, I would feel a little bit ripped off. So it contained the games Ball, Vermin, Flagman, Manhole, and Mario's Cement Factory. So it's only about 5 games or so. The game Ball was released in 1980, and it was also released as a Club Nintendo Game & Watch fully operational replica in 2011. And Ball wasn't Nintendo's most famous or most best-selling title, but it was really important because Ball sold well enough, about 250,000 copies, that it got Nintendo into the game business. They released a couple of TV Pong-style games in years earlier than this, but this is what really kind of projected them on their path towards the NES and the Game Boy and a lot of their record-breaking console sales. And a lot of historians say that if Ball hadn't created the type of sales that it did, Nintendo might have dropped off of the video game market completely. And I can't even imagine a world without Nintendo. It's such a staple in my life and my kids' lives now. So Ball's I guess just one of those little important titles. Have you played the game Ball? I'm pretty sure you have, at least on the Game Boy Gallery, right?
Yeah.
Or the Game & Watch Gallery, yeah. So you're, I don't know, help me describe this a little bit. You're like a guy that's juggling these 3 balls, right? And you've got to move your hands back and forth?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and so the balls, fall in, one of 3 slots on each side of your juggler, and when you move one hand to the right, his other hand also moves to the right. So he's moving his hands kind of in tandem, and you've got to line your hands up with the balls to catch the ones that are falling, and so it becomes kind of getting into a rhythm and trying to catch these juggled balls as they fly over your head. It's an interesting game. It's very, very simple, but pretty addictive, and once you get going with it, you get into this really cool rhythm, and it just feels really good. It's a really well-designed game for how simple it is. And I think that's kind of a testament to Gunpei Yokoi's game design, because he not only designed the hardware, but he designed the gameplay for a lot of these games, and I think he did a really good job with it. So a little bit about the gallery games. Now, like I said before, they can be played in 2 modes, modern or classic. In this particular version, I think you can only start with the modern versions of the games, and then you have to get high scores in each of the games to unlock their classic versions, and that kind of will emulate the original Game & Watch games on your Game Boy screen. And like I said, very simple sound effects for those and very simple graphics. I don't know if you would appreciate the classic mode so much if you weren't already a fan of the original Game & Watch devices. I mean, if you're a game historian, you'd probably like them, but I don't know. What's your opinion on the classic modes versus the modern modes? Which do you prefer to play in on the Game & Watch Gallery games?
Oh, I much prefer to play the modern.
Yeah. And, well, any particular reason?
I think pretty much the biggest reason is, they kind of do, they expand on the gameplay a little bit, and sometimes I feel like the classic versions, it's a little too simple.
Yeah, they start off very slowly and easily, and so it's almost kind of boring at first, and then it's like a lot of Nintendo games are. It's really simple until it's impossible, so you're playing for quite a bit, and then it gets to that level where you're like, all right, I'm feeling challenged, I'm feeling good about this, and then suddenly it's like so hard that you're just fumbling all over yourself. So, but I can usually get up to like 100 to 200 points before I start falling apart in a lot of these games. It takes a while to get to that level. So, but it's a good time killer. If you're sitting in an orthodontist chair and they're screwing your braces tighter and tighter, then you can play with your ball. No response from that one, Alex?
Oh, man. I can't believe that just happened.
Speaking of balls, let's listen to our next track, appropriately titled Manhole. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. That was Manhole from Game Boy Gallery, released on the Super Game Boy in 1995, composed by an unknown composer. I picked this one, and I picked it because I like the super sneaky but kind of happy feel to it. Kind of like, like a ninja sneaking down the road, but kind of like with a pep in his step kind of a deal. It just sounded like a cartoon, and a lot of these songs, I think, for this show are going to be very cartoony and very bouncy and very kind of happy, simple and short loops, but they're meant to be listened to kind of over and over again. So they made them so that they're very, very catchy songs. What'd you think about this one, Alex?
I thought it was a pretty neat little track. Just like the game, it's a pretty, really simple track. Kind of just like how the characters, they kind of, skip along, while you're trying to, cover up the holes in Manhole. The music kind of just goes along with, how they, with their movement.
Yeah, it's very cool. So there's two horizontal roads, kind of, one above the other, and there's two holes in each of the roads. And you play as this character who's holding a manhole cover, and you have to move him to these 4 holes to cover the holes as these kind of like skipping, unsuspecting people are kind of skipping down these roads. And you have to make sure that the manhole is covering the hole when they land where that hole is, or else they fall through the hole and you get a miss. And you get 3 misses and the game is over. So you have to get as many people to skip over these holes without falling into them as possible to get the highest score that you can. And so, it starts off with just one person at a time skipping across the road, and you kind of learn the ropes, and then soon, like, multiple people start skipping, and some of them start skipping in different speeds, and you've got people coming from different directions, so it gets pretty crazy. I think this is one of my favorite games from all of the Game Boy Gallery games that are on this title. I think I had the most fun with this one. So when you get, like, frenetic, the song speeds up, right, Alex? So it starts getting faster, and then it'll slow down a little bit. So the song isn't always just kind of like a boring loop over and over again. You kind of get a little bit more of a variety in the tone and the tempo of the pace, which is pretty cool. Any other games that you want to talk about on this? Because there's a couple more that we haven't talked about. So we talked about Ball, and then there's Vermin. I don't remember what Vermin was.
Vermin, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, sort of. Except you're just going left and right, and your character, he has like these really long arms and hammers, and like you just have to like position your guy where he has like the hammer, over whatever spot that you think these, the vermins are going to.
Rodents!
And you hit them, and that's, the objective of the game.
You just whack him on the head. Yeah, you got a little guy, you move him back and forth. And again, it's very similar to how it is in Ball, because you've got two hammers, one in each hand, but as you move back and forth, the hammers both move simultaneously. So you've got to position them so that each hammer hits the mole as they pop up to eat these vegetables. They're like turnips or something that they're trying to eat. And you have to whack them on the head before they eat these vegetables. And if they eat the vegetable, that's when you get a miss, and you get 3 of those misses, and you are out. And then there's also Flagman and Mario's Cement Factory. I played Mario's Cement Factory. That's where you have to, there's like cement dripping from the top of the ceiling, and you've got these 4 like basins with levers, and you've got to fill the basins and then move Mario to the levers to open up the basins to let the cement drop into, I think they're like trucks or wheelbarrows at the bottom, and like fill them up so they go away or something. I mean, if you don't do it at the right time, you can let them overflow, and if they overflow, then you get a miss. And I think if you don't empty them at the right time, then you can also get a miss. So there's a little bit more of a complex gameplay going on there.
Yeah, I think also is you go up and down like these little like elevators. They're just like platforms that just go up.
Yeah.
And I think if you somehow miss the platform, you could fall down and get a miss.
That's right. It's kind of like elevator action, or like the elevators that go up and down in like World 1, 2 in Super Mario Brothers. I think they may have even gotten that idea from there, where like, Mario's got to get to these little platforms that go, I think like the first one goes up and the second one goes down, just like it does in Super Mario Brothers anyway, so that's a pretty cool callback to the old Game & Watch games in Cement Factory. And then Flagman. I haven't played Flagman at all. Do you know what that one's about?
I haven't played Flagman either, but from, just watching videos of it, it seems like it's like a really intense game of like Simon.
Okay.
Where the Flagman, he will like raise different, flags, and they'll have like numbers and stuff on them, and like, he'll like, raise, one flag, then another, and then you have to like repeat what he does. Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at a picture of it now. So there's 4 flags labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the Game & Watch device itself has 4 buttons, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so you've got to hit those buttons in the order that he raises his flags. That's pretty cool. Like a simple game of Simon Says, basically. So you ready to move on to the next title?
Oh, yes.
All right, so we're going to move on to Game & Watch Gallery. Now, this is the first one that was released in the States, the one that Alex is the most familiar with. Came out in 1997 in the US, and then again on the 3DS Virtual Console in 2011. And this one was called Game Boy Gallery in Japan, so don't get confused, because there's Game Boy Gallery in Europe, which is different than Game Boy Gallery in Japan. Game Boy Gallery in Japan is the same as Game & Watch Gallery in the US and the European regions. Little complicated there. So this one also includes the game Manhole, but then it's got Fire, Octopus, and Oil Panic. It's also got modern and classic versions, which are selectable from the start, so you don't have to unlock the classic versions like you did in the Game Boy Gallery titles. And there's also 16 unlockable Gallery Corner mini-games that are accurate representations of the original Game & Watch titles, too. So this one is kind of packed full of really cool titles to play. So let's get on with our first track from Game & Watch Gallery.
I decided to go with Octopus.
Awesome. So this one was released on the Game Boy in 1997. This was composed by Yoko Mizuta and Jin Sugita. Alright guys, we are back. That was Octopus from the game Game & Watch Gallery, which came out on the Game Boy in 1997, composed by Yoko Mizuta and Jin Sugita. Now, a little known fact about these Game & Watch Gallery games is they were all programmed by a development house named Tosei. Tosei made a ton of games that were... It's like one of those like musical artists where like you know all these songs but don't know who made it, and then you finally find out like, oh my god, I can't believe they made one of my favorite songs. Well, Tosei's like one of those companies. They weren't very they didn't publish their own games, so you didn't see their name all over the place, but they had a lot of very popular games to their name, and the whole Game & Watch Gallery series was one of them. And that's why a lot of these composers aren't composers that you're going to be familiar with if you're familiar with a lot of the big name Nintendo composers. Before we get into the composers themselves, though, let's talk a little bit about this particular track, because I really like it. I really like that it's got that 50s feel at the beginning, and then it's got this very gallopy kind of B section where things just kind of really pick up the pace, and then it comes back into the loop really nicely. Like, why did you pick this one, Alex?
It's a pretty awesome track. I mean, that's, the biggest reason why I picked it. But, and that bass line, I love it. And actually, kind of a funny thing about that, I don't know how familiar you are with Popeye arcade game that Nintendo made.
Vaguely familiar. Like, I know the game itself, but I don't remember the soundtrack.
That bass line, it sounds very similar to one of the stage themes on that game.
Oh, okay. Well, that's like a very traditional kind of like a 50s like doo-wop kind of a bass line. So I can imagine that would be the same. Like a lot of the games back then had that very dun 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 dun, dun like very staccato chord progression in their music. I don't know why they decided that like 50s music was great for games when they first started coming out. But maybe that was just where all the older composers had their influences from. So, but yeah, I mean, I really like how they used one of the square channels that they're using for the bass line in this, and it's very thick and very fun to listen to. So a little bit about the composers. So Yoko Mizuta, she was known by booing Boo on a lot of her games. It's a very strange alias. I don't know why she picked that. But she began around 1995, and she was credited for sound work on Dragon Ball Z Super Gokuden Kakusaihen, which featured a Kenji Yamamoto soundtrack. And then after that, she composed Game Boy games for Tosei between 1997 and 1999. Aside from Game & Watch Gallery and Game & Watch Gallery 2, which we'll be featuring pretty soon, she also composed the soundtrack for Legend of the River King, which came out on the Game Boy. And not much is known about her after that. So she had kind of a short career in video games. Hopefully she moved on to other composing stuff and had great success. Jin Sugita, same thing, just Game & Watch Gallery. That's about it. Never heard or saw from Gene ever again after this one. I mean, unless they went by aliases or changed their name, but I think a lot of the composers on these Game & Watch Gallery series, we don't have too much information because they didn't really compose for video games that much, which is nice because we get a lot of unique music that you're not going to hear like the same composers over and over again. It's not like Koji Kondo. Like, of course, he's an amazing composer, but we've heard lots of Koji Kondo music. It's nice to kind of hear other people composing for the Game Boy that didn't really compose too much for other systems. So, yeah, Octopus. Have you played this one? So this is one of the games that you had as a kid, right?
Right.
So you've got like a lot of experience with a lot of these games. So Octopus is... I don't know. How would you describe the game Octopus?
Octopus.
That's the one where I think Mario's going down to get the treasure.
Yeah.
Right.
He's going down. Grab the treasure that is guarded by this gigantic octopus, and while you're down there, trying to grab the treasure, you're trying to avoid all the tentacles and stuff. If you get caught by one of the tentacles, that's a miss. And just like Game Boy Gallery, 3 misses and it's game over.
Yep, that's pretty much the way that it works with Game Boy Gallery. I mean, Nintendo loves to do things in threes. Like the bosses, it takes 3 stomps on their head to beat them. 3 misses with Game & Watch Gallery and you're done. So they love giving you 3 strikes and you're out. So you're going to see that as kind of like the traditional game over in most of these Game & Watch games. But this one includes Oil Panic, which I think is one of my favorite Game & Watch games. So in that game, you're Mario, and you're in this castle, and Bowser's on top of the castle, and he's like pouring oil onto the roof for some reason, and it's dripping through the ceiling, and there's flames on the floor. So you can't let the oil get to the floor or it blows up. Now, outside the castle, running back and forth for no particular reason, is Yoshi. And on the bottom, on the ground outside the castle, you've got Luigi having some sort of a picnic, and then Donkey Kong Jr. like rocking back and forth in a diaper or something. It's like a Nintendo fever dream. Like, what the hell is going on here? So Mario's got these 2 glass containers, and he's got to catch the oil drips in these containers, and you can press a button to like switch, like flip him around so that the containers like flip, and he's got to catch the oil, and he can only catch 3 drips of oil in each container. And then when Yoshi is on one side of the castle or the other as he's walking back and forth, you have to make Mario get to the edge of the screen, so he dumps the oil into Yoshi's mouth, and then Yoshi spits a fireball. If you dump the oil out when Yoshi's not there, then you dump it on the head of Luigi or DK Jr., and then you get a miss. And if the oil hits the ground, then it explodes because there's fire under your feet for some reason, so you also get a miss. It's like the craziest setup I've ever heard. It's like Mario took too much NyQuil before he went to bed. But it's a lot of fun to play, and I had a blast playing Oil Panic. So I chose the song from Oil Panic to play for our next track. So let's give a listen to that one, and we will be right back. All right, that was Oil Panic from Game & Watch Gallery, which came out on the Game Boy in 1997, composed by Yoko Mizuta and Jin Sugita. This was one of my picks, but Alex, why don't you give us your thoughts on this track first?
Oh, I love this track. Isn't
it so good?
It is honestly, like, it is the best track in the game, hands down. And I would have picked it, but I also kind of picked this track on an episode of VGM Jukebox, so I didn't want to, like, I don't know, do a repeat for myself, but I was glad that you picked this track.
Yeah, I don't remember the specific tracks you picked for VGM Jukebox, but I remember whichever track that you first picked got me really into wanting to find out more about the series. So you said it was, you think it was probably this one, and I would absolutely agree. I mean, if I heard this one on VGM Jukebox, I would be all over trying to figure out more about this this series of games. So, but I love it's got super thick percussion. It's got a great groove to it. The stereo panning is fantastic. These two songs, Octopus and Oil Panic, are a far step above the very, very simple kind of ditties that you heard in the original Game Boy Gallery title. And I don't know, I mean, as far as Game Boy games go and Game Boy soundtracks, I think this is probably one of my favorite tracks ever on the Game Boy. It's so much...
Oh, wow.
It just sounds so good. I don't really know how else to explain it, but it's got a fantastic, thick, like that square wave bass line, those kind of, crunchy drums, like the little piano trills. It's just, everything fits really well. It has kind of that same 50s aesthetic that Octopus does, too. So, these composers probably drew a lot from, like, the blues and, like, a lot of the early rock from the American 50s that these songs kind of take place of. So, and it's interesting because as strange as the Oil Panic game is, this song makes everything feel very normal. It doesn't feel very panicked. It does speed up when the game starts getting a little more frenetic, but it's great to just kind of listen to this awesome soundtrack and listen to and play the game at the same time. These are all available, by the way, as virtual console games on the 3DS, and I definitely recommend picking them up. They're really not that much. I think they're like $2 or $3. I think it's like $3 for the first one and $4 for Game & Watch Gallery 2 and 3. And it's nice because you get to hear the music in stereo because the 3DS has the stereo speakers. If you track down the original cartridge and you want to play the Game Boy game, you need the headphones to get the stereo experience. But the songs sound really good coming out of the 3DS speakers. They have a really nice kind of a stereo separation on those speakers in that system. So I really enjoyed how they sounded coming out of there. And the games play great, and you can use save states so you can, kind of like save your high scores. And it's not really like cheating. It's just kind of like never turning off your Game Boy. So it's good. I think a lot of these games have battery saves, right?
Right.
And you have to like pause the game before you turn it off for it to save your high score correctly. I think it gives you a little notice at the beginning of the game if you want to do that. So, anything else you want to talk about with Game & Watch Gallery before we move on to the sequel?
I mean, this is just kind of a bold thing for me to say, but, like, this game kind of helped me, go on the path of being, like, a huge VGM enthusiast.
Hey, man, with a song like this, I do not blame you. Like, this would, like, force me to understand that, oh my god, like, video game music can be actual really good music, And
I mean, I don't know if, like, everybody knows, but, like, there's a bit of an age difference, between you and I, and, like, I was, like, just a little kid when that game came out, so, I mean, it was, like, one of the first games I ever played.
Yeah, so let's see. 1997, I was old. I was very old. I was, let's see, so I was 19 years old when this came out, which kind of explains why I probably wasn't too into it back then, because at that age, obviously I don't know what I was doing when I was 19. It's all a big blur, but it was not playing Game Boy Gallery games, that's for sure. I think I was working at GameStop around then. I was more into like the more grown-up games on the PS2 and stuff like that. So definitely not playing Game Boy games. Anyways, let's talk about Game & Watch Gallery 2. So Game & Watch Gallery 2 was released in May of 1998 in the US, and that came out on both the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. You can get two different cartridges, one specifically for the Game Boy and one for the Game Boy Color. And then again, it did come out on the 3DS Virtual Console in 2012. This contains a couple of game repeats. So Ball is there and Vermin is there, but you're also going to play Helmet, the Donkey Kong version, which is the Game & Watch Donkey Kong, not like the arcade Donkey Kong, and a couple more games called Chef and Parachute. And Parachute rang a bell because I think that was one of the tracks that you recommended for one of our fan episodes that we did back on Pixel Tunes. Is that right?
I was actually just about to talk about that. Yes, it was Parachute. And no, I did not pick Parachute.
No, so you guys are going to have to go out and find that track for yourselves or go back and listen to, I think it was episode 80 of Pixel Tunes Radio. We did the fan favorites, and you can hear Parachute and hear us talk a little bit about that on that show. But aside from that, this kind of introduced the star scoring system, I guess, or the you can earn star points, and you can do this in Game & Watch Gallery 2 and the games going forward. So as you do well at each title, you earn stars, and stars unlock new items in the museum. So there's music, different versions of the game Ball. So with Ball, you can unlock different Mario characters that play the game Ball, and so the character in Ball is like right up close to the screen, so you get good close-ups of all of their faces and stuff. So it's nice that they started adding a little museum to each of these games, because then you got to learn a little bit of Nintendo history as you played these Game & Watch Gallery games. Gave you a little more connection to the games that you were playing. So I don't know, do you remember anything else about the museums in the Game & Watch Gallery games? Because I haven't gone through them that much, but I know you've actually played the game, so.
Man, I keep thinking about the museum and stuff on 4, so on the top of my head, I want to say, like, you just, like, they'll have, like, different games that you could, like, you could just look at it, and there'll be, like, some information on it, like, obviously, like, the name of the game and when it was released. But I don't remember, like, a whole bunch of stuff about it. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, so you pretty much get, like, screenshots of different Game & Watch games, but they're not actually playable?
Yeah, I don't think they're playable, no.
Okay. That's cool. I mean, it's still a little bit of history that you get to experience and maybe try to find those Game & Watch games for yourself. But they started getting, like, new music and sound tests and stuff, so you would actually be able to listen to these tracks outside of playing the game, which is cool. You can kind of focus on the music instead. So, what's your first pick from Game & Watch Gallery 2, Alex?
I went with Chef.
Awesome. All right, so let's listen to Chef from Game & Watch Gallery 2. This came out on the Game Boy Color and Game Boy in 1998. Composed by Yoko Mizuta, Noriko Nishizaka, and Saburo Sasaki. All right, that was Chef from Game & Watch Gallery 2, which came out on the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy in 1998, composed by Yoko Mizuta, Noriko Nishizaka, and Saburo Sasaki. Fun little track. Very, very relaxing feeling. Why did you pick this one for your first track for Gallery 2?
So I definitely couldn't pick Parachute again. I don't know. I just thought it was a cute little track. Something a little different than I would normally listen to, but I just liked it, and it kind of goes with the game a little bit too.
It feels very summery, like a first level of a Kirby game or something. The sun is shining and there's green palm trees everywhere. It's got that kind of a breezy feel to it. The game itself, I guess the feeling they were going for might have been more like feminine or something, because this is a game where you, in the modern version, you take the role of Peach, and you've got Mario and Luigi on the left and the right of you, and they're cooking food. And they're flipping food over their heads, and Peach is holding a very hot pan. And so Peach has to run back and forth and catch this food, and when she catches it, it bounces back up. And if you bounce the food a couple times, the food eventually cooks itself. And so once the food cooks itself, you've got a little Yoshi that follows you along the bottom of the screen. You've got to let the food fall past you and into Yoshi's mouth. And I guess once Yoshi eats cooked food 5 times, then he lays an egg, and then 5 more times, and the egg hatches, and it's a little Yoshi, and then you just kind of keep going on through all of these new Yoshis that are just hatching and eating food. And but if you don't let the food get cooked enough before it falls in Yoshi's mouth, he turns into like baby Yoshi. Or if you feed him burnt food, he gets mad. If the food falls on the floor, then Peach gets mad. So there's a lot of different ways to fail. And then the food will start coming at you from all angles at, the later points in the game. So you're running back and forth trying to bounce all this food until it's cooked enough and then letting it fall past you. So it's a crazy game, and it's got a lot of depth to it and a lot of ways to fail. But the screen on the Game Boy Color anyway is it's mostly like pinks and whites and blues. So it kind of feels a little bit more like this track, I guess. It's got very pastel colors to it. You think you feel the same way? Like it kind of fits like what the screen aesthetic is?
Oh yeah.
It's got that kind of like nice breezy kind of feel to it. I really like this one. A couple of different composers on here as well. So we already talked about Yoko Mizuta from the first game, but the newcomers are Noriko Nishizaka, and that was a Toze employee who started off working on all 3 versions of Yoshi's Cookie, so the Game Boy, the NES, and the SNES version of Yoshi's Cookie in 1992. And yes, by the way, Yoshi's Cookie was developed by Toze. It was not a Nintendo-developed game. She also composed Game & Watch Gallery 2 as part of a team in 1998, this particular title, and then she ended up being the solo composer on Game & Watch Gallery 3, which is the next game we're going to be talking about. Saburo Sasaki, another one-hit wonder, very similar to Jin Sugita, just composed Game & Watch Gallery 2, and that was it. As we used to say in Pixel Tunes, turned into a ninja, was never heard from ever again. So, like I was saying before, a lot of these composers are like one-hit wonders or just composed 2 or 3 games and just kind of, poof, disappeared, never to be heard from again. So I got my next pick coming up. Let's give a listen to that one. This is Helmet Level 3 from Game & Watch Gallery 2. Again, composed by Yoko Mizuta, Noriko Nishizaka, and Saburo Sasaki. All right, that was Helmet Level 3 from Game & Watch Gallery 2, which came out on the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color in 1998, composed by Yoko Mizuta, Noriko Nishizaka, and Saburo Sasaki. Thoughts on this one, Alex? I'll let you go before I chime in.
This is definitely not Chef. That's for sure. It's
very, very different from Chef.
Oh, it is way different than Chef. Like that, that bass, it's pretty cool. It's got this, really aggressive sound to it, very gritty, dirty. It's still awesome too.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that stood out to me. A, because it was very diametrically opposed to the Chef song, which was very light and breezy, and Helmet 3 just sounded so like dirty, grungy rock. I love that bass line. Dun 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 dun. The great, almost kind of like squealy guitar leads or something. It felt like Ninja Turtles, like towards like the Technodrome, the original NES Ninja Turtles. Felt like that kind of, like there's a song that plays in the overworld in the airport where it's very similar to Come Together by the Beatles. Like it gave me that kind of a feel for this track, so I was reminded of that one really nicely. And there aren't many other tracks in the Game & Watch Gallery series that sound like this one, so I really kind of wanted to pick it out as kind of like an outlier from all the other kind of very happy and bubbly Game & Watch tracks. Helmet is a game where Mario is situated, and he's got to repeatedly run between two mushroom cap houses, and he's got to get from one door to the other. And overhead, there's a flying Koopa Troopa, and he's dropping hammers and spiked balls down onto the ground. And so he's got to run from one side of the screen to the other without getting hit by these hammers and spikes and stuff. And there's a yellow P-switch that's also on the ground, and when you hit the P-switch, coins pop up, and coins might pop up in front of you and behind you. So to up your score, you can kind of run back and forth to get the coins before you make it into the other door, but at the same time, you're putting yourself at more risk when you do that. So you can either choose to run, forward and lower your score by not getting the coins, or go back and forth. And this is one of the few games that I know of that has different levels and different music for each level. So it's not just like we were talking about with Chef or Manhole or something where it just kind of gets faster over time, and the music just gets a little faster. This one's actually got 3 distinct levels with 3 distinct background music pieces for each of those levels. And it's fun. It's like a little side-scrolling, not really a platformer, but more like an endless runner kind of a game that you might find on a mobile game nowadays where you're just dodging these hammers and stuff. I don't really know why they call it Helmet, because you're not wearing a helmet, and even so, your helmet's not really protecting you from anything, so it's like the game is named after the most or the least important thing in the whole game.
Well, I mean, it gets its name, from the classic version, which it's pretty much, the same thing, except for the whole different levels and the P-switch. So I think on the classic one, I think you're running from like one house to another, and there's like all these tools and stuff. Flying
you're in a construction site, I think, and there's tools falling off of the building in the background, and you're wearing a hard hat or a helmet, so you're a construction guy and you're trying to get to safety from all these wrenches and hammers and stuff that are falling on your head.
And the other, the cool thing about the modern version of Helmet, other than the different levels and music, you could also play as Wario.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's cool.
I think before you select if you want to play like the modern or classic version of the game, I think you have to hold a certain button, I don't know, maybe A and start or something.
Something simple, yeah.
And you could play as Wario instead of Mario.
That's awesome. All right, now I gotta go boot that up after we record on my 3DS and check that out, because Wario is one of my favorite Nintendo characters, so that just makes this so much better.
And the whole grabbing coins thing, I mean that's definitely him, all right.
For sure. If only they had a little sample that goes wah as soon as he gets into the building, that would be the icing on the cake. All right, so let's move into Game & Watch Gallery 3. Now, this came out the next year, May of 1999 in the US, and that came out Game Boy Color only. And then again, it came out on the Virtual Console on the 3DS in 2015. This contains the games Egg, Greenhouse, Turtle Bridge, Mario Brothers, and Donkey Kong Jr. to begin with, and then you can also unlock Judge, Flagman, which we've already heard about, Lion, Spitball Sparky, and Donkey Kong 2. So it's had quite a number of games that you could play in both the modern and the classic versions. But you can also connect this one to the Game & Watch Gallery 1 and 2 with a link cable to unlock more classic bonus games. So if, Nintendo knew that you spent money on both of the earlier titles, you can get more value for your buck. So that was pretty cool. So Alex, what was the first track you picked from Game & Watch Gallery 3?
I went with Turtle Bridge.
Cool, so let's listen to Turtle Bridge. This came out, again, on the Game Boy Color in 1999, and this was composed solely by Noriko Nishizaka. Let's take a listen. Alright, that was Turtle Bridge from Game & Watch Gallery 3. It came out on the Game Boy Color in 1999, composed by Noriko Nishizaka. Alex, very cool track. I got some RPG kind of a feel to this, like a Final Fantasy kind of a deal. What was your thoughts on this one, since this was your pick?
I definitely was not thinking Final Fantasy. I don't know. I just picked this track because okay. Here's my thing with the Game & Watch Gallery 3, though. It's my least favorite game, in the series, and music-wise, it's also my least favorite.
Not a big Nishizaka fan, huh?
Yeah, I guess not. But I thought Turtle Bridge was pretty cool. It's just got this kind of fun, kind of bounciness to it.
Yeah, it starts off very, very flighty. Like I would picture clouds and flying and stuff, but then that ending was like da 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 da, like the rising and falling kind of arpeggios reminds me of the beginning of Final Fantasy, which is why I think it sounds more like that.
Well, it's kind of funny that you mentioned clouds, though, because you are playing as Toad, and I'm trying to picture, on the top of my head, I think you're like kind of just, jumping across like all those little seagull enemies and stuff from Yoshi's Island, and there's also clouds that, you could go on into, I think there's coins. I think there's coins flying. You could grab the coins for, more points and stuff. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to transport a mushroom from Mario on one side of the screen to Peach on the other.
Okay.
And you gotta just go, back and forth.
So what's the challenge there? Like, how can you fail?
Well, while you're jumping across, the seagull guys, I think there's stuff flying from the bottom of the screen. I think they're like balloons or something. And the seagulls, they're hitting them. And while they're hitting them, I mean, you could like fall off of them. So you gotta like avoid that.
Oh, okay. So like they like dive down to pop the balloon, and then if you try to jump on them while they're diving down, then you fall right through them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds pretty difficult, I guess. Especially if the balloons start coming up at crazy intervals, then you've got to really time your hops from bird to bird. It's pretty cool. Well, at least I got the cloud part right. I mean, that sounds like it's very floaty. So it sounds like this bridge is like way up in the sky or something like that. So I guess they got the feel right for that. So the song I picked from Game & Watch Gallery 3 isn't actually from a game. It's from the music room, which is located in the museum of the game. But I heard the song, and I really wanted to play it because, again, it sounds very, very different from a lot of the other stuff on the soundtrack. Much more my speed, maybe a little faster, maybe a little kind of aggressive. So let's take a listen to Music Room, composed by Noriko Nishizaka from Game & Watch Gallery 3. All right, folks, button up the rest of that polyester collar, because that was Music Room from Game & Watch Gallery 3. Came out of the Game Boy Color in 1999. Composed by Noriko Nishizaka. And that was Disco City. Very dancey, very fun. Alex and I were talking about that bass groove at the beginning. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Very, very cool. Very fun track. I really like this one. I like the warbles for the lead line. That sliding like boing. Sounds like guitars just kind of going off and doing their own thing. I don't know. What'd you like about this one, Alex?
Everything.
It's a great little hidden gem. Like, it's not part of the games themselves. You might not even go into the music room at all, if you weren't really into that stuff, if you were playing this game. So a lot of players might not have even experienced this cool little track, or not experienced a lot of it if they were going to go play other pieces of background music in there. But I don't know. I really like this one.
Oh, it definitely stands out, and it's like way better than this game deserves. That's just my opinion.
So, I mean, what about this game didn't you like compared to Game & Watch Gallery 2?
I don't know. I just don't find the games like as fun, to play. Like I don't know. They kind of just picked out like, I guess, just some weaker games and the Game & Watch, library. Like they could have picked some others, much better, games.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, there's some in here that we're kind of familiar with. Donkey Kong Jr., Flagman, Donkey Kong 2, Greenhouse, where Yoshi's protecting plants from enemies by spitting watermelon seeds at them. Mario Brothers, which has nothing to do with the original Mario Brothers game. It's like Mario and Luigi. They're trying to keep cakes moving on a conveyor belt. So, there's games that are cool. I think the graphics are a little bit better in Game & Watch Gallery 3, but I think the games in Gallery 2 are just more fun to play and a little more deep as far as gameplay goes, but still nothing compared to Oil Panic. I think Oil Panic is still like my favorite game out of all of them so far.
Yeah, it's really hard to beat Oil Panic.
It sounds so silly and so stupid, but you really got to play it to understand the joy of filling cups with oil and dumping them onto Yoshi's head. All right, so let's get into the next game. This is Game & Watch Gallery 4. You're going to hear a little bit of difference in music here because this was actually a Game Boy Advance game. So the games that you could play right off the bat in this particular title are Fire, Boxing, Rain Shower, Mario Cement Factory again, Donkey Kong Jr. again, and Donkey Kong 3. This came out in 2002, and then the Wii U Virtual Console release was in 2016. And this overall features 20 classic games and 11 modern games. So let's take a listen to your first title, Alex. What'd you pick for this one?
I went with Rain Shower.
All right, so this is Rain Shower from Ryu Kinugasa and Kengo Hagiwara. Alright, we're back. That was Rain Shower from Game & Watch Gallery 4. Came out on the Game Boy Advance in 2002. Composed by Ryu Kinugasa and Kengo Hagiwara. Two composers that I was not familiar at all with before this game. And very unique music. So, for those who don't know, the Game Boy Advance was obviously backward compatible with Game Boy games. So similar to like the Genesis that had backward compatibility with the Sega Master System, there's actual Game Boy sound hardware in the Game Boy Advance. So programmers that were developing games for the Game Boy Advance could take advantage of not only the Super Nintendo style audio channels in the Game Boy Advance, but also use the Game Boy sound hardware at the same time. So what you're hearing here is a song primarily composed with the Game Boy instruments, but using like the bass tones and the percussion from Game Boy Advance hardware. So it sounds like an enhanced Game Boy sound. It's really cool, and I really like how they did it with this particular song. So why'd you pick this one for the show, Alex?
I just thought it was a cool little track, a nice, short and sweet, kind of track. So I think the loop is like only, I don't know, like 20 seconds. And it sounds really good when the game starts to speed up too. So you're definitely going to be hearing that a lot.
Yeah, this has a lot of very kind of like short like little pauses in between. So when it starts to speed up, it still feels you're still able to like not let it panic you too much, I guess. But it has a very nice kind of calm, islandy feel to it. I feel like it might have like kind of almost like a calypso background to it. But like you said, lots of fun to listen to, very relaxing but kind of energetic at the same time, very smooth tones. I'm a really big fan of that sound where you have like the Game Boy sound plus those thicker kind of Game Boy Advance style drums in the background. Just really cool. So this game had a ton of mini games packed into it. So on top of those games that we just talked about before the song, there's a whole bunch of secondary and tertiary games that you can unlock by obtaining stars in the primary game. So you can play a different Game Boy Advance version of Chef. Mario Brothers are back, and that's the cake on the conveyor belt game again. Donkey Kong, Octopus, and a new game called Fire Attack. And then in addition to those games, you can play Manhole, Tropical Fish, Mario's Bombs Away, Parachute, Bomb Sweeper, Dynamite Jack, Climber, Safe Buster, Lifeboat, and Zelda, which is really cool. You can play the original Game & Watch version of Zelda. And all these tertiary games are games that you can only play in classic mode, and you can't earn any stars for getting any further or getting high scores in them. But it's cool to actually play some of these games that were ports of the original console games on the NES and the Game Boy. So that's kind of a new addition that they threw in for the fourth version of the Game & Watch series. And on the Game Boy Advance, it's really cool too, because now you've got a wide screen, you've got much more colors, the graphics are much more easy to look at, easier to see what's going on. I remember I was playing Fire, which was a game where Peach's castle is on fire. And anything's possible in the world of Game & Watch. And so all these Toads and baby Donkey Kongs and baby Yoshis are jumping out of this building, and Mario and Luigi are at the bottom of the screen with a trampoline, and they've got to bounce their victims, 3 times across the screen to finally get into like an ambulance wagon that's on the side. And I played it originally on one of the earlier Game Boy Color titles, and just the fact that the Game Boy Advance's widescreen just gave you so much more room to let the characters bounce along, and it just felt much more natural having a wider screen and a lot more color and better animation. Really made these Game & Watch games kind of pop. So Alex, did you play much of Gallery 4, or did you just kind of stick with the Game Boy Color ones?
Gallery 4 is probably the one that I've played the most. I love Gallery 4.
Awesome.
I mean, one kind of knock that I have against it, with the modern games, they're mostly remakes, from the first 3 Gallery games. They brought back like some good ones too. This game, it's just, it's packed with, a lot of content. Even the new games are really good. And actually, an interesting thing about, I think, 2 or 3 of the games, there's also multiplayer on them.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. That would be a lot of fun. So this is actually the one I've spent the least amount of time with, because I had the earlier versions on my portable 3DS, so I could kind of take it around and play it with me. But this one I had to use an emulator for, so I was kind of stuck playing it on my computer. So I only checked it out a little bit. And there's so much content in this one. It sounds like it's got a really large selection of really cool games that I only really played a couple of the games that were remakes of the ones that were on the Game Boy Color versions, just because I wanted to get a good idea of how much they've changed from the Game Boy Advance versions since the Game Boy Color versions. So I didn't get a chance to play them all, but I'm definitely going to check more out. I especially want to check out Octopus and the game from which I picked my next track and the last track of our show, Fire Attack. So let's give a listen to that one, and we'll be right back. We'll talk a little bit more about the composers when we get back. This is Fire Attack from Game & Watch Gallery 4, composed by Ryu Kinugasa and Kengu Hagiwara. All right, that was Fire Attack from Game & Watch Gallery 4, which came out on the Game Boy Advance in 2002, composed by Ryu Kinugasa and Kengo Hagiwara. I picked this track because, again, it has just a nice little groove. It's very, very catchy. Like, when I was listening to it, I wasn't of the particular mindset that it was like an amazing song, that it was the best one I've ever heard, anything like that. But as I continued throughout my day, I would get this kind of like melody stuck in my head, and I was like, where am I remembering this song from? And then I went back through the soundtrack and I'm like, oh yeah, it's Fire Attack. I'm totally like remembering that over and over again. So that's why I kind of picked it, because it's an earworm. It's something that you just kind of remember and keep on remembering. I haven't even played this game myself on this collection yet. But I can imagine if I were playing it and listening to it over and over again, trying to get a good score, that I would have this song in my head forever and ever.
Oh yeah, Fire Attack is actually a pretty cool little game. You play as Wario.
Sweet, already happy.
Trying to defend this statue of himself from bullet bills and bomb bombs and stuff.
That's cool.
And like the misses are pretty cool for it, because like if any of them get to it, well, actually, I should back up a little bit. First, it just starts off as like this wall, okay, and as soon as like one of them hits it, the wall breaks a little bit, and you see this gold statue right behind it. And then when they hit it again, that'll be your second miss. The wall completely comes down and it's just the statue. And then if they hit it one more time after that, then the statue is destroyed.
Oh, that's cool. So it sounds like in the Game Boy Advance games, they've really like added in some extra animation and really took advantage of, the Game Boy Advance capabilities to kind of make these games a little more alive, have different things happening as you're playing these games instead of a static screen where things are just moving around. So that's really cool. I really got to check this out. I know it's on the Wii U Virtual Console, so it would be cool to check that out on the big screen as well, if you don't want to go like the PC emulation route or anything like that. So, but let's talk a little bit about these composers, because these composers, even though still working for Tosei, had a much more rich history with video games and video game music after working on this title. So Ryu Kinugasa started his career at Capcom in 2002, and he was a sound editor with the GameCube port of Resident Evil 0, and then he worked as a composer for Game & Watch Gallery for Tosei that same year, working on this game. And after that, he stayed on with Tosei for a while, working as a sound effects programmer on the Game Boy Advance title Dragon Quest Monsters Caravan Heart in 2003, and then sound designer on Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas Oogie's Revenge in 2004. In 2006 and 2007, Tosei ported 2 Avatar The Last Airbender games to the Nintendo DS, and Kinugasa worked as sound designer on both of them. And he finally got back to composition again with the cult hit Deadly Premonition, one of my favorite games, in 2010. And after some programming on recent Dragon Warrior ports, finished off with Story of Seasons for the 3DS in 2015. Kengo Hagiwara, after his debut on Game & Watch Gallery 4, he arranged and composed music for Nightmare Before Christmas Oogie's Revenge, so he worked with Ryu Kinugasa on that. And then he created the sound effects for the amazing Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins, which came out on the PSP. That was a fantastic title. Also developed by Tosei, which you probably didn't even know. He also worked on arrangement and original compositions for Square's updates of Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy II. Those are the versions that came out on the PSP and the mobile devices in 2007. And he was last seen as the sound lead for Square's quickly forgotten World of Final Fantasy title that came out in 2016. I think that was like on the Xbox One and PS4 and stuff. So yeah, both of these composers both went on to some big AAA titles and were still working in the video game industry, up until about a year or two ago. So that's cool. And I kind of feel like I understand why, because they did something very unique with the Game Boy Advance hardware and like composing Game Boy music with Game Boy Advance enhancements, which a lot of people didn't really do. A lot of other Game Boy titles, you see them really relying on those sample channels that the Game Boy Advance has. And the game's music comes out kind of staticky and crappy sounding when you do that, but when you use the Game Boy regular channels, it maintains a lot of its clarity, and it really helps, I think, the Game & Watch Gallery games maintain that kind of classic feel without feeling too out of whack with a more modern soundtrack. So, any final thoughts on the Game & Watch Gallery series? Like, are there any... So, if you were just kind of getting interested in Game & Watch Gallery, and you wanted a good place to start and some suggestions for fun games to start you on your Game & Watch Gallery tour, where would you recommend people start? Which games would you recommend people start with?
I think 4 is probably a good start. I mean, you know, good graphics, pretty content-heavy game. I believe that's a good starting point. And, you know, if you're interested in, you know, any more, I mean, then you could just go back to 1, 2, and 3 and check those out.
Yeah, I would say that maybe Game Boy Gallery, that original game we played on this show, maybe check that out last. Definitely not as your first title, because you're not going to be very impressed with it. You know, it might be something fun to try out after trying out Game & Watch Gallery 4, just because it goes from like this really well-produced Game Boy Advance title to this very, very simple, like one of the most simple Game Boy games ever made. So it might be cool to kind of compare and contrast where the series began to where the series ended and kind of sandwich the other ones in between. But, you know, as we said, definitely try out Oil Panic. That's one of my favorite games. I really liked Octopus. I really liked Manhole. So any of those that you want to try out with, you can't go wrong with that. It sounds like Fire Attack is a lot of fun, too. If not so much fun to play, at least fun to watch, because it sounds like Wario kind of going crazy trying to protect a golden statue of himself, which is a very Wario thing to do. And then so there's a lot of cool games that kind of take the personalities of the characters of the Mushroom Kingdom and kind of build upon that and put them in kind of wacky situations and stuff. So you're going to see a lot of unique stuff that you might not find anywhere else. So again, I want to thank Indira J for the art and Trevin Hughes, otherwise known as Dread, for the amazing podcast theme song that brings the show in. You can find the VGMbassy on iTunes. If you are listening on iTunes, please don't be afraid to leave us a rating. I've got a lot of ratings on there already. People left some very, very nice reviews on iTunes, so thank you very much for that. That really helps give the show a little bit more of a visibility boost when people are cruising through iTunes to find cool game-related podcasts. So the more downloads and the more reviews, the better. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/TheVGMbassy. I'm at Twitter at the VGMbassy and also Instagram at the VGMbassy, and also Patreon now. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Patreon site. Since it is live, we do have some amazing Patreon patrons that I want to give thanks to. So at the tourist level, Mr. Chris Murray, our VG emissaries, Scott McElhone, Chris Myers, and Donovan Orofino. Thank you so much, guys. The audio attaché level, Cameron Worma and Carlos. I'm sure you'll remember Cameron Worma from our Deep Nostalgia episode, which was just a couple episodes. I think our last episode, episode 8, was with Cameron Worma. It's been like a month since I recorded that episode, so I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. And at the VG Ambassador level, Alex, the Messenger, and you are witnessing a Patreon reward in action right now. So what'd you think? Was it worth it, Alex? Sharing the Game & Watch Gallery stuff?
Oh yeah,
on the VGMbassy?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I love this stuff so much, and like, I want everybody to, you know, at least give it a listen. Yeah,
it's definitely worth a listen, definitely worth a play. There's a lot of very cool content packed into these little games, and they don't get a lot of attention. You're right. You don't hear a lot of people kind of extolling the virtues of these games or giving like glowing reviews on YouTube or anywhere else. So we definitely wanted to make sure that you guys know about these games and know about these soundtracks and give them a listen. All right, so Alex, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so glad that we were able to share both of your passions so far, hockey and Game & Watch series. I'm glad that you were able to come on and share these awesome pieces of music with us. I don't even know, man. Next time I have you on, are we all out of passions? Like, is there anything else you can share with us that you really like?
I mean, I got like all kinds of different stuff that I like. Nothing that I could think of on the top of my head, but I mean, we kind of knocked out like the big ones already.
So we'll leave the rest as a surprise, as well as our next episode will be a surprise. So, again, guys, thank you so much for checking us out, and we will see you back in 2 weeks with another VGMbassy. Peace out.
Bye.